So welcome everybody, and welcome to those online as well. So what I'd like to do first is do a quick introduction. My name is Keith Holmes Brown. You can possibly pick up from my accent that I'm British by birth, but I lived a long time in Australia, so I claim Australian citizenship by default, if you like, simply because we're better at sports in Australia than we are in the UK. My background, I'm an engineer, qualified as a production engineer, and then moved into quality assurance with the British military organisation. So I was working as a civilian with the military, got into quality assurance, left UK, moved to Australia. Everywhere I went, they said, "Oh, you know about this quality stuff." So I ended up working as a project engineer / quality manager, and then worked for a company that made purpose-built recycling equipment. So got really interested in environmental issues. I went back to school, did a postgrad in environmental management, and then got heavily into environmental issues, and then moved into consulting. So I ran my own consulting company for 13 years, worked mainly with mining companies and oil and gas companies. And working with those companies, got heavily exposed to safety and became a HSE consultant, or QHSE consultant, quality, health, safety and environment. Went back to school again a couple of times, did qualifications in training and eventually a master's degree in safety management. And then got headhunted by an oil and gas company to work in internal audit. So my first exposure to internal audit. And for me, it was like, why? What would I want to be an auditor for? Because I had this very negative connotation of what audit does. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And then, for various reasons, my family and I moved back to UK. And so I moved out of audit back into an operational role. Most recently, I was the safety director for Arctic LNG, big oil and gas project in northern Russia. So traveling to Russia once every quarter, learning Russian for the sake of the project. And then, of course, Vladimir Putin decided he didn't want me in country anymore. And so we pulled out of Russia. And after pulling out of Russia, I went to the big boss and said, "Look, I'm close to my use-by date, but I fancy carrying on working." "Okay, what are you interested in?" He said, "Well, I really like the global travel. I like troubleshooting. I like investigation. I like a bit of training, a bit of business improvement." So here I am back in internal audit. So what I want to talk to you about today, and I deliberately chose the topic of this title as "Is ESG bad for the environment?" to try and stimulate a little bit of a challenge, if you like. I probably could have just said, "Is ESG bad?" Full stop. But we'll talk about that. So I want to talk about the rush to report, what's behind the numbers, to look at whether some of the things that we see in ESG reports are honest mistakes, or whether they're greenwashing. And then to look at ESG versus sustainability. Are they the same? Is there a difference? And what are the differences? And then finally focus on ESG assurance. And what can we in IA do in regards to ESG assurance? Okay, so as I just said, I've really described that one, so I'll skip over this one. So I'm going to make a few statements to you. And then after I've made these statements, we're going to have a bit of a voting session. So if you've all got the apps on your phone set up ready for voting. So the world is flat. Okay, it's a statement. Companies that report on ESG are making environmental improvement. And the third one, obviously, my birth certificate is incorrect. I'm actually really only 39 years old, not 66 years old. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just think about those statements, and then when we do the voting, which I will put up now. So use your voting and look at those statements. Is number one correct? The world is flat? None of them are correct. Statement two may be correct in some cases, or all of the statements are correct. Thank goodness, some of you agreed that the world is flat. Who are you? Just a quick show of hands. Who here said that the world is flat? Nobody in this room? Maybe it's the online people, but anyway, whoever you are, just keep it quiet. The rest of these people don't know. Obviously, the one that would resonate with most people is that companies reporting on ESG should be making environmental improvement. And the question really is this true in all cases? So, statement one clearly is true, otherwise how did I get the picture? Does anybody know what that picture is? Okay, for those who wish to know, it's from a book, series of books by a guy called Terry Pratchett, an English author. He writes satirical comedy books about this flat world. Statement two is the one that should be true. Statement three, as much as I would love it to be true, unfortunately, I am as old as I am. And really, I could almost finish my presentation. I could almost finish the presentation at that stage. Because the premise of this presentation is that ESG has become such an industry in its own right, and reporting seems to be done simply to meet the reporting requirements. The organizations are busier promoting their ESG reports than they are actually making environmental improvement. So when I was doing the research for this presentation, I did a lot of research, looked at a lot of articles, looked at a lot of ESG reports. And this slide came up on LinkedIn and really resonated with me, this idea of, can we move the world across the dollar sign a little bit more to make it look as if we're doing something? Because really the question here is, for me, is it about the money? Is it about the environment? Or is it about social governance, social accountability? Or is it about the money? So, another question for you. Why has the requirement for ESG reporting grown at such an exponential rate? Are we waking up to our ESG responsibilities? Is it good business? Are we being driven? Okay, so some interesting numbers coming out of this. Very small percentage saying that it's just a flavor of the month. If I'd asked that question a year ago, I think that number would have been a lot higher. But we're starting to see that it's not just the flavor of the month. It's starting to be embedded in legislation, starting to be enshrined in things like CSRD in Europe. And so it's here and it's with us and it's going to stay with us. We've now got to address it. Good for business and foolish not to. Yeah, companies are finding that there's actually benefits. Some companies are finding they need to report on ESG. But the main issue here now is it's now being driven largely by regulation. To a certain extent, public demand, but I still think regulation is the main driver. Does it matter? Does it actually matter why we are reporting on ESG. For me, when I first heard about ESG, I first started getting interested and involved in it, it was like, oh wow, this is going to be fantastic. This is going to be great. Because I'm a bit of a closet greenie. I don't class myself as an out-and-out greenie at all costs. I work with industry, I work within business, I worked in mining and oil and gas, and I think those are necessary industries for us. For me, it's about helping those industries actually work in a much more sustainable manner. So when I say, does it matter? If they're reporting on ESG, and if the intent of an ESG report is to demonstrate levels of potential environmental improvement, then this is great. This is a win-win situation. But what's a bit scary to me, and in my research, is when I started looking at ESG reports, was finding ESG reports that said absolutely nothing. And even now, even with regulation coming in place, and with the reporting standards coming in place, we're still seeing reports that are legally or against the standards actually allowed to say nothing. We can write a report that says, we didn't make any improvement. Well, maybe it's not good business to do that, but the focus is on the report, not on any environmental issues. So, in my words and my belief is ESG reports are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and glossier and glossier and glossier and actually saying less and less. So 20 years ago, Kofi Annan, who was the then General Secretary of the United Nations, invited the leaders of the major financial institutions of the world to join up with the World Bank and the United Nations to come up with an initiative to look at how investment is driven with the idea of focusing on sustainability, with the idea of focusing on the environment. So the idea about integrating ESG concerns into capital markets. I wonder now, if Kofi Annan, and for those who perhaps followed the history of Kofi Annan, he died, unfortunately, about 6 years ago. In my opinion, one of the best General Secretaries of the United Nations that ever was. But I wonder when he did this, when he invited the financial institutions to become part of that initiative, did he realize, did it occur to him that maybe he was sowing the seeds for one of the modern day conspiracy theories about how global finance is now driving our world, and that things like ESG is just another term, another excuse. ESG reporting is just another excuse to say, look, we're doing something. So one of the phrases that comes to mind with this idea of putting global finance in at the table for something like ESG is, have any of you heard of the expression putting the fox in charge of the hen house? Because that's what it smacks of to me. So coming from an environmental background and having done a lot of work with my colleagues in the environmental field on mine sites and within the oil and gas industry, one of the bits of feedback I'm getting from my colleagues, or former colleagues, when ESG started getting talked about, I'm saying to these guys, wow, this is great for you. This is going to be fantastic for environment within your organization. Without exception, my environmental colleagues have said, no, that's not the case. ESG has been detrimental, and ESG currently continues to be detrimental to the environment within our industries. And why is that? And these are my terms. In my mind, we have two concepts of environment. We have big E, and then we have little e. So big E, for me, is something that we do, something that we do to create a positive impact. It's a change we make. Maybe it's finding an alternative fuel source. Maybe it's putting an environmental initiative in. Maybe it's protecting water courses, reducing pollution, minimizing waste, all of those sorts of things. And then there's little e. So little e is a byproduct of modern society. It's a byproduct of what we do. We've reduced our waste. Well, we've only reduced our waste because the stuff that we buy comes in less packaging. It's a small improvement, but it's not something that we did. It's just a byproduct of what we do. And again, what I really want to focus on is, should ESG reports be talking about big E rather than little e? So, what could and what should we report under? What should we report under the E for ESG? So if E, and if we're talking big E, damn. I have to apologize to you now because I've actually gone one slide too far, I think. Okay. I'm going to ask you the question rather than put that one up. Come on. Okay. Rather than me talk about what we should report under Big E for environment, what do you think we should report under? So again, if you go into your voting, just give me some words, give me some topics that you think we should report on under environment. Okay, policy. Emissions, yes, thank you. Sustainability investments, controls, waste and conservation. I always try to look at your boards when I've actually got it on my screen in front of me, but I'm a mover, so I like to move around. Carbon emissions, fuel usage. Okay, so that's pretty much what industry is starting to report on. It's also what the reporting guidelines are targeting. So in Europe, we now have CSRD, and they've released the first set of reporting standards. And within those reporting standards, there are some early mandatory reporting requirements, and then later on, it'll be a phased approach into additional reporting. And also, I should add that initially reporting, they're saying, will be subject to limited assurance. So they've already set the goal for reporting to be assured at a third-party level. Later on, it will go down to a reasonable assurance level. So I'm just going to go back one there. So when I said what can we report on? So yeah, climate change, carbon footprint, number have you got? Interestingly, preservation of biodiversity, air, water quality, deforestation, responsibly managing waste, energy usage and efficiency. So there's things in there, and when I put this presentation together, I think at the time I put this presentation together, we could choose from one of 5 or 6 different standards. that we would choose to report on. Again, since I developed this presentation, CSRD has now been released in Europe, and that's making a huge, huge change. And for me, it's one of the positive steps. It's why I'm thinking that, in spite of the title of this talk, is ESG bad for the environment? Now I'm thinking, okay, with CSRD and with the teeth that it will have, this may be good for the environment. So, I was looking for a word to describe. I mentioned earlier the fact that ESG reports, and a huge number of ESG reports that I've read, really don't say anything at all. I thought there's got to be a word for this in the English language. So I searched, and then just by chance I came across this one. Circumlocution. And trust me, it's not a word I'd ever heard before. I'm sure that it's a word I'd never use in normal conversation. I don't think any of you would either. But circumlocution, the use of the use of many words where fewer words would do, especially in a deliberate attempt to be vague or evasive. So we've all met people, we've all had conversations where people were doing this without even knowing the word. Are ESG reports doing exactly the same? Are they just using a lot of words? The slide I had earlier, ESG reports are getting bigger and bigger. But are they just using just a lot more words to hide the fact that they're really not doing a great deal? So, a gentleman called Andrew Winston from Sloan MIT, in his words, in regards to ESG, it's likely a part of why the investors like it. They're talking about real progress on environmental and social issues without saying much at all. So what I'd like to do now is look at some examples. So this particular example was from a 2022 ESG report, and it was a large consulting group, global consulting group, one of the biggest in the world. And in their 2022 ESG report, 100% of air travel subject to an internal carbon fee. Okay, I like this one. It's a good one. So if we're going to put an internal fee on air travel, carbon fee. But when I looked at the report, I was like, okay, this is great. I wonder what they're doing with that internal fee they're charging. I wonder what they're using it. So the purpose of an internal fee is then to use it to drive something else. Or if we spend money on this, we can offset it against that internal fee that we're charging. But what are they using this for? There's nothing at all in their report to say what they're using this for. It's a statement, a simple statement, not verifiable in any way, shape, or form from reading their report. The second one, 97% of renewable energy towards a goal of 100% by 2025. Wow, that's great. That's a real improvement. So if we're using 97% of renewable energy, again, when I looked for the data behind it, when I looked for the details in the report, where's the renewable energy coming from? How much of the renewable energy are we buying directly from renewable energy sources? How much of the renewable energy are we simply buying offset certificates to claim that we're using renewable energy sources to give us that 100%? And in fact, Amazon, 2 days ago, Amazon claimed 100%. 100% of Amazon's energy globally, they are claiming, is now from renewable energy sources. Obviously, they buy energy. If you're buying energy in UK, currently I think about 43% of that energy can come from renewable sources, if you're buying it. So in order to do that 100%, you've got to get offsets. The report on Amazon basically said they've made the statement, but there is little evidence behind to verify whether this statement is true. And again, that's where we as internal audit come into play. So sometimes we don't have a say in statements that our companies issue, in the marketing statement that may be issued, but we do have a say in data. We have a say in what information is available within our organizations and verifying that information, A, is true, and B, can be substantiated. The third one, and I love this one, 48% reduction in Scope 3 emissions. So Scope 3 emissions are the emissions that we inherit from other activities that we do, so things like air travel. So 48% reduction in Scope 3 emissions from travel per colleague versus a 2019 baseline. Bear in mind, this was their 2022 report against a 2019 baseline. Now, my memory is not very good. I have the short-term memory of a goldfish, so I swim around the bowl, and each time I see something new. But I seem to remember something happening between 2019, end of 2019 and 2022, that pretty much restricted air travel for all of us. So, yeah, for those of you who haven't heard about COVID, I'm not sure where you were the last few years, but every single organization I know, every single person I know, their air travel was restricted by far more than 48%. And they're claiming this as an environmental benefit. They're claiming it as an environmental improvement. If you remember my statement earlier about Big E, an environmental initiative where we take the initiative and make an environmental improvement, or Little E, something that's just a byproduct of what we do. So 48% reduction in air travel per person, to me, was a byproduct. It was a byproduct of COVID. I'm surprised, I really, really am surprised that an organization of this size would even make such a statement. So, in fairness, this organization is on the A list for transparency globally within their industry. They're a highly recognized, highly renowned organization. They do a lot of good stuff. So I don't want to rubbish the organization, simply they're a consulting group and they produce an ESG report. I ran my own consultancy for 13 years. If I was still running my own consultancy today, I would produce an ESG report and it would be glossy and it would say all sorts of wonderful things. So I'm not, I'm not trying to rubbish the fact that they made a report, simply that the data in the report was not verifiable. So I'll give you another couple of examples about what's behind the numbers. So the first picture there on the left-hand side is a massive big dump truck, big Caterpillar dump truck, one of the biggest in the world, if not the biggest in the world. So some ridiculous figure, 340-ton payload of dump truck, extensively used in mining operations around the world, particularly in Western Australia, where I'm from. So saw lots and lots of these. And then the second example is just a truck, any truck, a diesel truck that puts out dirty black smoke. It puts out emissions. So I'm going to talk about two different examples here. So the first one was the Global Mining Services Company with a big fleet of dump trucks. We looked at their annual sustainability report. And the first claim they made was a reduction in emissions and fuel consumption. When we started looking at the data, when we started looking at the numbers behind this, yes, they had an annual reduction in emissions and fuel consumption because the aging fleet, which they didn't include, was sent to Africa. because the emission standards were less at the time. So they sent their aging fleet to Africa and then excluded Africa from their calculations in their report. So it's out of sight and it's out of mind. So yes, they got emissions. Again, little e. The next one, on the social side, was increased training hours. The biggest single increase in training hours was in Africa. Oh, damn, we've just excluded Africa from our report. Okay, well, we better bring it back again. So we brought Africa back into the report again for training hours, which made us look really, really good. When I say us, by the way, I wasn't working for this company. I was actually there auditing this company. The third one was safety. Now, unfortunately, the safety standards or the implementation of the safety standards within Africa were lower than most of the other parts of the world that this company operated in. And so Africa, unfortunately, was making our safety stats look bad. So let's exclude Africa again, because then our safety stats will look better. This report was verified by one of the Big Four. This report was given a limited assurance by one of the Big Four. I got called in by the environmental manager, who incidentally was really, really annoyed. I'm being polite here by the expression annoyed. You can imagine the type of words she was using, because she was not even consulted about the content of the report when it was put out. The sustainability report, and she wasn't consulted. It was a business decision, a marketing decision. So she called me in and said, I'm getting a lot of complaints. So the board is now getting complaints from shareholders about some of these numbers. Can you come in and do a verification of these numbers for me? And this is what we found when we verified the numbers. Okay, next one. He says, hopefully. Okay, the next one, a large-scale oil and gas project. Subject to global finance. So this project got a lot of global finance, and there were very, very strict environmental conditions put on this project before it was allowed to proceed. So the project, amongst other things, had to report on NOx and SOx. So nitrogen oxides and sulfur oxides. The contractor reported 2.72 million tons of diesel use over a period. And 2.72 million litres approximately equals 2,250 metric tons of diesel. And yet they reported almost, well, more than double that in terms of NOx emissions. Now, I'm an engineer, but I'm not a scientist, and to me that's creation of matter. I'm not sure how you can actually produce double the amount by weight of emissions from a product. I went to this particular site, and I'm looking at their environmental report, and I picked up this number, and I thought, wow, how is that possible? How on earth are you putting out that much pollution of NOx emissions? So we looked at how they're reporting, and as far as the contractor that I was auditing was concerned, no, we just put the number in a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet comes from the company, the owners of the project, who report to government, who report to legislators, who report to global finance. This has been going on for about a year. There was a 1,000-fold error in the calculation. Every single contractor on that site had been reporting using this spreadsheet for nearly a year, and nobody had picked it up. So what does that tell you about the value of the report? What does it tell you about who was looking at this report? What does it even tell you about what the numbers actually mean? Okay, we have to report. We've reported. Job done. So within internal audit departments, I know within the company I'm working for now, we are looking very, very heavily at ESG and internal audit's role within ESG. What's our role going to be? We haven't defined it fully yet. We haven't defined where and how we're going to get involved. We haven't defined exactly what levels of assurance, internal assurance, we will be giving. But for the rest of you here, for the audience and those online, I'd like to ask you another question. Do you currently include ESG issues within your internal audit environment? Are you even auditing your ESG reports? Okay, wow, that's a surprise to me. I was really expecting the most comments to say that, yeah, our reports are audited, but they're audited externally. So again, I keep talking about CSRD in Europe, but CSRD has actually written into the regulation that audits will be done. There will be limited assurance given on ESG reports. So audits will be done. For those of you who are auditing your own ESG report, and if there's any in the room who are doing that, please, if you have time later on today or tomorrow, please seek me out and catch up with me, because I'd be really, really, really interested in your own experiences of that. So I'm in a very fortunate position, because coming from an operational background and also having qualifications in environment, I get to almost dictate a little bit about how we're going to approach ESG auditing within our organization. So you all hopefully will have heard of double materiality. And it was talked about first probably about 5 years ago, about how can we identify, particularly from an environmental perspective, but also from the E and the S side of ESG, what do we need to look at? What's important to us? What do we need to pay attention to? The traditional line of materiality was, what is it that the outside world or the outside environment imposes on us as a business that we have to do that becomes material to us, that might affect our profit, for example? So the concept of double materiality is, okay, we need to also turn that around and say, what is it that we do that might have an impact on the planet or the environment or the people in terms of impact? The traditional picture you see of that shows the globe, and it shows a factory or a building. And I've deliberately imposed the dollar sign on that, because I still think that we are paying more attention to materiality in terms of money than we are actually in terms of environmental impact. So there are things that we do that have environmental impact. And one of the impacts of the reporting structures that are coming into place is it's a phased approach. So I've already got examples of companies in their phased reporting approach. They have deliberately chosen to delay environmental improvement initiatives because they don't have to report on them yet. So they'll delay them until such time as, oh, okay, now we have to report on that. We'll now put in place that initiative and we'll get some brownie points for it. So to me, the materiality side of it says actually the impact of the report and the publicity from the report and the positive feedback we'll get from the report is of far greater materiality than the environmental impact. So, my words, why on earth did we need double materiality to tell us what was important from an environmental perspective? Let's go and talk to our environmental department. Go and talk to your environmental people, your environmental managers. They can tell you we don't need to do a double materiality assessment to actually identify this. And as I said, I put the dollar sign on there, the very sort of the recent uptake, if you like, of double materiality assessments suggests to me that previously we were only ever looking at bottom line. So how do we, in internal audit, what can we do? How do we establish a level of assurance? So the IIA, a couple of years ago, launched a white paper. I don't know if any of you actually, just a quick show of hands. I know apologies to those online, but a quick show of hands. Anybody here read the IIA white paper on ESG reporting? Okay, it is available online. It's there. It's got some good suggestions, and it's certainly got some good guidance there as to how we can start incorporating or how we can start addressing IIA's role in ESG reporting. Okay, the ESG imperative. So one of the things the IIA white paper talks about is the ESG imperative. It says the relevance of ESG, the risk to our businesses from ESG is actually growing. Okay. So the bits in red are the bits that I highlighted, but this is the statement directly from the IIA white paper. Potential reputational damage from faulty reporting, the examples I gave you of faulty reporting. If nothing else, it just says that we didn't take due care. The possibility of an organization's explicit commitments to meet specific environmental goals could grow into a material weakness. That is the risk that I was talking about when I said that organizations are delaying their reporting on certain issues because they don't have to report yet. Because we seem to have a focus within ESG reporting that it's either or, that environmental improvement is about, here's the goal, we've met it 100%. From an environmental perspective, and as I said, as a closet environmentalist, I really don't care. If you set a goal to achieve a 50% reduction in a certain emission, and by the end of the year you've only achieved a 30% reduction, that's 60% towards your target. I don't care if you didn't meet 100, that's great. You set an ambitious target. But unfortunately, the way the reporting is structured seems to be, if we're scared that we don't meet 100% of our target, we won't report on it. The second recommendation from the IIA white paper was that we can add value in an advisory capacity. We can help create the functional ESG control environment, and that's something that in my own organization we're working on at the moment. And we can provide independent and objective review of the effectiveness of our risk assessments, our responses, and our controls. So if nothing else, even if we're not providing assurance on the report itself, if we provide assurance on the mechanisms that we've got in place, the mechanisms for collecting data, the checking of the data, the validation of the data, etc., then we know what's going into the report is actually going to be correct. Now, I don't even know whether to talk about this in front of an audience of internal auditors and IIA members. I'm going to talk about ISO standards. ISO 14001, the environmental management standard. I have a sad admission here now to all of you. I used to be an ISO auditor, and I'm sorry. It was just, I was young, I was naive. I used to train ISO auditors. I was actually the first registered ISO 14001 auditor in Australia. First triple registered ISO auditor for quality, safety, and environment. I think ISO standards are amazing. I think they're brilliant. I think the level of auditing of ISO standards is absolutely atrocious. And I never realized really the difference between ISO auditing and auditing as we know it. I ran a training course once and a lady stood up and said in her introduction, "I'm a real auditor." Okay, what does a real auditor do? And she explained what you guys do. And I said, well, we go through all of that. But actually, until I came into internal audit, I really, really didn't understand the level of rigor, the level of discipline, which is missing out of ISO audits. The reason I'm talking about ISO 14001 is that it's actually a good standard. And I think this idea that we are better than ISO auditors is a little bit arrogant on our part. And I can say that because I've sat on both sides of the fence here. And maybe I'm being arrogant in the sense that I actually believe that we in internal audit do a much more thorough job than ISO auditors tend to do. What I think we've got an opportunity to do here within internal audit is to actually raise the level within our own organizations. Coming up the escalator, there's a sign from one of the vendors here that talks about integrating all three levels of assurance. So I went and spoke to them and said, okay, wow, this is exactly what I'm trying to do at the moment. I'm working with our health and safety director to try to integrate the safety audits and the environmental audits that are being done on site so that we in internal audit can get a greater degree of assurance. Because at the moment, we get zero assurance from ISO audits. We hardly even look at them because some of them, in my mind, are not worth the paper they're written on. And I'm talking about our own internal ISO audits, not the third-party certification audits. But if we can up their game, if we can work together with our environmental people, our safety people, to actually teach them what audit's all about and teach them a level of discipline in ISO auditing, then we can get a level of assurance from it. So I think that's an opportunity for us to improve within internal audit our understanding of environmental issues. Interestingly, within any of the guidelines, with any of the international standards that are coming out in regard to ESG reporting, I have not seen a single mention of ISO 14001. And yet it is currently the most widely accepted international standard for environmental management. So again, I think we've missed an opportunity in our desire to keep ourselves at distance from ISO auditors. I think we've missed an opportunity. And apologies here, I meant to say second line of defense here, not third line of defense, but yeah, we're keeping those lines of defense separate. We have internal people who do safety audits, who do quality audits, who do environmental audits, and we don't pay any attention to them. And the final part of that is just we can also help by including those types of audits in our assurance regime in something that we look at to give a level of assurance on as internal auditors. We can help those audits get a little bit of visibility at that board level. And I guess this is just really just saying what I've already said, is that there's any area at all where in internal audit we're ill-equipped. I think it's in the area of operations. Now, I'm biased because I'm an operational auditor, not a financial auditor, but I really think we miss the opportunity to get our environmental people and our safety people involved. So maybe a guest auditor program that includes safety and environmental people. Most of our guest auditors within my own organization come from financial areas within the company. Very few of our guest auditors actually come from a safety or an environmental perspective. Okay, so just wrapping up now. 2022, has anything changed? So PwC report stated complex and inconsistent regulation is a stumbling block to increase the ESG focus. A lack of consistent, transparent standards has made mislabeling products as ESG commonplace. Is ESG reporting, or ESG standards, are they unfit for purpose? Are they the perfect storm for greenwashing? Maybe. This was a report from Util, London-based fintech company, that talked about ESG being unfit for purpose and a storm for greenwashing. And most importantly, they said a lack, what were the words, exact words, a lack of measurable positive impact in terms of sustainable development goals. So just to wrap up, the very final slide here. I love this cartoon. You guys made an unpopular choice at this conference. So you guys made the choice. You came to a conference, you came to a talk that was labeled, is ESG bad for the environment? That's just going against the grain, guys. You're all rebels here. So I think that we in internal audit have an opportunity here. I think ESG is tremendously powerful. CSRD and other regulations that's coming in place is making this happen. We've got reporting standards coming out. But I really think that we need to pay more attention to environmental outcome and make sure that our ESG reports reflect environmental outcomes. Thank you very much. And we do have a little bit of time. How many minutes? 5 minutes. 5 minutes for some questions. Am I aware of guidance or standards on ESG applicable to the United Nations system? Not so much the United Nations system, but as I say, from Jose, who raised this question, I would really say have a look at CSRD and have a look at the ISRS, the European reporting standards. What metrics or frameworks should we prioritize to ensure that our ESG reporting reflects genuine progress? I think the metrics should come from your environmental people. The business sets its own KPIs, but actually go and talk to the environmental people and find out what KPIs they would want in there. So if we want to make sure there's a real difference happening, the environmental people in your organization will know best. Can an in-house internal auditor issue a limited assurance report? Gosh, now, having only just come back into internal audit a couple of years ago, I have to throw that question open. Can an internal auditor issue limited assurance? Yes, no? Quick show of hands, yes? Who says yes? Okay, so a couple of us think yes. I would have thought yes, but I think under the strict definition of limited assurance, it has to be wholly independent. So it has to be a third party. That's my understanding, and somebody please correct me if I'm wrong on that one. Somebody pointed out that IFRS, the standards, the reporting standards 1 and 2, are being implemented starting 2024. How will we balance between these standards and operational audits, ISO, etc.? Well, again, at the moment, we're not balancing because we're not even including them. So balance, to me, could be exactly what I talked about, raising the standard of our ISO audits. And we have no control over the external certification bodies, but we do have control over our own people. We can bring them up to speed, we can upskill them, and we can actually get our ISO audits, which is what I'm working on in my current organization, to a level where our internal ISO audits are providing sufficient value for us in internal audit to actually count on them as a level of assurance. Okay, that was it. Thank you very much.